He's breaking and he doesn't live there. That was the first thing I heard when I stepped onto my own porch with a bag of new locks in my hand. Across the street, Karen Whitmore, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, was screaming into her phone, pointing at me like she'd just caught a fugitive on live TV. Except the criminal was me, the actual homeowner. I couldn't help but smirk. The only reason I was changing my locks today was because she had already broken into my house last week under the excuse of an HOA inspection. But this time, the only thing being inspected was her sanity. When the police cars finally pulled up, she strutted toward them with confidence until the moment they saw me. Their faces changed instantly. They didn't question me. They didn't draw their weapons. They saluted. And just like that, Karen froze. Before we dive into how this HOA meltdown began, drop your location and local time in the comments. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss the full story. If you've never lived in an HOA neighborhood, let me paint you a picture. Imagine a place so perfect it feels fake lawns trimmed to military precision mailboxes, all the same height and every driveway cleaner than a hospital floor. Now imagine one person who believes it's her sacred duty to enforce all of that. That's Karen Whitmore, the president of the Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association. When I moved in 3 months ago, she was the first neighbor to greet me, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched on her head like she was about to write me a ticket. "Welcome to Maplewood Estates, mister." She squinted at my name on the moving truck. "Carter," I said. "James Carter." Her lips twitched. "Ah, yes. I'll make sure your name is added to the registry. We have guidelines here. You'll receive a welcome packet soon." That welcome packet arrived the next morning, 50 pages of rules written in a tone that could make the IRS sound friendly. There were regulations for lawn color, mailbox, paint curtain, opacity, even how long your car could stay in the driveway before being considered an eyesore. At first I thought it was all just overzealous suburban management. But then I noticed something. Karen wasn't enforcing the rules, she was weaponizing them. The first violation notice arrived on day 4. Your trash bins were visible from the street for more than 6 minutes after pickup. 6 minutes. I timed it. She was right, but still. Who the hell times trash bins? Next came a complaint about the color of my porch light being too warm for HOA standard aesthetics. Then another about my American flag being too large compared to adjacent residences. Each letter ended with her name typed in bold, Karen Whitmore, HOA president, as if she was signing a royal decree. I started laughing them off. I had just retired from federal service 20 years with the U.S. Marshals, now consulting part-time for Homeland Security. After years of chasing fugitives and managing tactical ops, a nosy neighbor with a ruler didn't exactly intimidate me. But Karen didn't know that. To her, I was just another middle-aged guy with a truck and a quiet attitude, the perfect target for HOA dominance. Her obsession grew fast. Every time I left for work, I'd catch her peeking from behind her curtains. One afternoon, I saw her actually crouched by my mailbox taking a photo. When I walked up behind her, she jumped and pretended to check the neighborhood flowers. It was equal parts creepy and hilarious. Then one weekend, things took a darker turn. I had flown out to D.C. for a short security seminar, just 3 days. When I came home, I immediately sensed something was off. My back door was slightly ajar. A faint scent of perfumed lavender hung in the hallway. My dining chair was shifted, and someone had left muddy footprints near my desk. I froze for a second, instincts kicking in. I'd seen enough break-ins to recognize one, but nothing was stolen. The drawers were rummaged through, papers shifted, but expensive electronics untouched. That's when I checked the footage from my home security system. At 2:13 p.m. the previous Thursday, my back gate opened. In walked Karen Whitmore, dressed in her HOA blazer, accompanied by a maintenance guy carrying a clipboard. She didn't knock, didn't call, she just walked in. They looked around the kitchen, checked the thermostat, even peeked inside my refrigerator. Then Karen pointed toward my office, and the camera caught her flipping through my mail, snapping photos of my property documents. I remember sitting there jaw tight, replaying the footage over and over. She had literally broken into my home under the pretense of an inspection. That night I didn't confront her. Not yet. Experience had taught me one thing: when someone abuses power, you don't yell, you document. So I downloaded the footage, labeled it, and sent a quiet message to my lawyer. The next morning, while sipping my coffee, I saw her walking her dog, that ridiculous Pomeranian named Duchess. Our eyes met. She smiled politely and waved as if nothing had happened. The audacity almost made me laugh. That's when I decided time to change the locks. I wasn't about to let the woman who took pictures of my living room have another spare key. I called a locksmith I knew from my federal days, a quiet guy named Roy, who didn't ask questions. He agreed to come by that afternoon. When the truck pulled into my driveway, Karen appeared almost instantly, like she had some HOA radar that went off whenever something happened in her neighborhood. She marched across the lawn in her signature lavender blazer and clipboard, shouting before she even reached us. "Excuse me, what's going on here? This property modification wasn't approved by the HOA." Roy looked at me confused. "Modification, just keep working," I said calmly. Karen's tone sharpened. "You can't just replace locks. All exterior fixtures must maintain HOA standard design." I looked at her deadpan. "So you're saying I need your permission to secure my own home?" she huffed. "We have procedures, Mr. Carter. Safety checks approve contractors, like the contractor you brought when you broke in," I asked. Her face twitched. "Excuse me," I took a slow sip of my coffee. "You heard me." That was the first time I saw her mask slip a flash of panic behind her eyes. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. "I don't know what you're implying, but you're making a mistake. The HOA can fine you for noncompliance." I smiled, then added to my file. She stormed off, muttering something into her phone. Roy whispered, "She's calling someone." "Oh, she's calling everyone," I said. "Let her." Within minutes, she was pacing on her porch, phone in hand, shouting into the receiver. I could hear her from across the street. "Yes, officer, there's a man breaking into a house. I think it's stolen property. He's aggressive." I hadn't moved an inch. Roy froze mid-task. Should I stop?" "No," I said. "Finish the job. It'll be worth it." A few neighbors peeked through their curtains. One even started recording on his phone. By the time the faint sound of sirens echoed down the street, Karen was standing proudly at the end of my driveway, arms crossed, ready to witness her victory. I leaned against the porch railing, calm as ever. I'd faced armed fugitives, corrupt sheriffs, and border standoffs, but somehow this HOA showdown felt funnier than any of them. She had no idea who she was calling on. When the police cars turned, the corner lights flashing, Karen ran toward them, waving her clipboard like a flag. "There, that's him. That's the man," she screamed. "He's breaking in." The officers slowed the car, glancing between her and me. Roy whispered, "You good man." "Oh, I'm great," I said, slipping my hand casually into my jacket, not for a weapon, but for something far more shocking. As the car doors opened and the officers stepped out, I stood straight, watching Karen puff up with satisfaction. Her face said it all. She truly believed she'd just caught a criminal. Too bad for her, the next 10 seconds were about to change everything. The police cruisers rolled to a stop at the curb engines, humming lights bouncing off the windows of my house like a silent warning. Karen was in full performance mode, now hair wild, clipboard shaking, voice trembling with theatrical outrage. "There he is, right there," she screamed, pointing at me as though she'd caught a most wanted fugitive. "He's breaking into the home of one of our residents. He's dangerous." I stood by my front porch, calm as a Sunday morning sermon, one hand in my pocket, the other holding a coffee mug that read, "World's Most Patient Man." The irony wasn't lost on me. The two officers stepped out of their vehicles, both mid-30 seconds alert but measured. You could tell from their posture they'd already dealt with their fair share of false alarms. Sir, one of them called out, hand resting on his holster. "We received a call about a possible burglary in progress." "Can we see some ID?" "Of course," I said, reaching slowly into my jacket pocket. "But before I do, you might want to hear something first." Karen stomped forward. "Don't listen to him. He's lying. The real homeowner's away. I manage this community. He's trespassing." The officers exchanged a look. They'd already sized her up one of those callers. I pulled out my wallet, flipped it open, and revealed a small leather badge case. The silver glint of the emblem caught the afternoon Sunday. The reaction was instant. Both officers straightened their backs. "Deputy Director Carter," one of them said, eyes widening. "Former Deputy Director," first corrected with a small smile. "Now a civilian consultant. But I still know protocol." Both men immediately brought their hands up in salute. "Sir." Karen froze mid-sentence, her mouth hanging open. For the first time since I'd met her, she was utterly silent. The officer nearest to me lowered his voice. "Apologies for the confusion, sir. We weren't informed. No harm done," I interrupted politely. "Just doing your job." "But I believe Mrs. Whitmore here has some explaining to do." Karen blinked rapidly. "Explaining, I was just protecting the neighborhood." The younger officer raised an eyebrow. "Protecting it by calling in a false burglary report on the homeowner. I didn't know he lived here," she stammered. "That's interesting," I said, sipping my coffee. "Because you sure seemed comfortable enough walking inside last week." Her head snapped toward me. "What are you talking about? Oh, come now." I stepped down from the porch, holding up my phone. "You didn't think I'd install a full security system without cameras, did you?" I tapped the screen. The familiar footage played Karen and her maintenance accomplice waltzing right into my home. Her face went pale. That's fake. You can't." The older officer shook his head. "Ma'am, I'm pretty sure that's you in the lavender blazer and pearls." The small crowd of neighbors that had gathered by now, people who had lived under Karen's reign of HOA terror, started whispering among themselves. One of them chuckled. Another pulled out his phone and began recording. Karen spun around desperate. "He's twisting this. I'm the president of the HOA. I was conducting a compliance inspection." "Without consent?" I asked. "I don't need consent," she barked. "Our bylaws allow, not under federal law, they don't," I said evenly. "And last I checked, you don't outrank the U.S. Marshals Service." Laughter rippled through the small crowd. Even one of the officers couldn't help smirking. Karen's voice rose shrill with panic. "This is harassment. You can't," "Ma'am," the officer interrupted, his tone turning firm. "You need to calm down. Making false emergency calls is a criminal offense." "Do you have any idea how many resources you just wasted?" Karen looked from him to me, realizing the tables had turned completely. Her face flushed bright red. I didn't know." He looked suspicious. I looked suspicious. I repeated deadpan, standing on my own property, holding a coffee mug and a bag of locks. The second officer scribbled something in his notepad. "We'll need a brief statement for our report, sir." "Of course." Karen tried to regain control of the situation. "I'll be filing a complaint. You're intimidating me." "You're Mrs. Whitmore," the first officer said sharply. "You're lucky, mister. Carter isn't pressing charges for trespassing. I'd suggest you take your clipboard, go home, and rethink your definition of community safety." For a moment, I thought she might explode. But instead, she clenched her jaw, spun on her heels, and stormed back toward her house, muttering to herself. Duchess, her fluffy Pomeranian, barked as if echoing her frustration. The officers lingered a few minutes longer, chatting politely with me. One of them, the younger guy, grinned as he looked around the pristine neighborhood. "Must be something living under this kind of management, huh?" "You have no idea," I replied. "It's like living in a country with its own dictator. Just smaller lawns." They both laughed, shook my hand, and left. As the cruisers drove off, several neighbors came over, some applauding softly like they'd just witnessed a courtroom victory. "About time someone stood up to her," said an older man named Frank from across the street. "She's been writing us up for having the wrong color mailboxes since 2019. Guess she picked the wrong guy this time," another neighbor added. I just smiled. Let's just say I've had practice dealing with stubborn authority figures. As the crowd dispersed, I turned toward my newly changed locks. Roy the locksmith reappeared from the truck, looking half shocked, half delighted. "Man," he said, shaking his head, "that was wild. You didn't tell me you were some kind of big shot." "Retired big shot," I said, "but I don't like pulling rank, unless someone calls the cops on me for existing." Roy laughed nervously. "You want me to finish up? Yeah, and don't worry, you're getting a bonus for emotional damage." While he finished tightening the new deadbolt, I leaned back against the porch railing, watching Karen's blinds twitch across the street. I could feel her eyes burning holes in me. She'd made a fool of herself publicly, and I knew from her type that humiliation doesn't sit quietly. Sure enough, less than an hour later, I got a knock on the door. Not from the police, from a courier delivering a letter from the Maplewood Estates HOA. The heading in bold letters read, "Notice of Community Non-Compliance. Unauthorized Security Alteration." I burst out laughing. She'd barely stopped shaking from the police encounter, and she was already filing paperwork. The letter accused me of unauthorized modifications to exterior fixtures and failure to submit an architectural change request. It even threatened potential fines up to $500 per occurrence. I folded the letter neatly and set it on the counter. I'd handled cartel disputes that were less ridiculous than this. As the sun set, I sat on my porch sipping another cup of coffee and smiled to myself. Karen had just declared war. But this time she wasn't facing a passive homeowner. She was facing someone who'd spent 2 decades enforcing federal law, someone who knew how to play the long game. She thought she could use the HOA to intimidate me. What she didn't know was that I had friends who wore badges too. And soon enough, those friends would be joining me for a little neighborhood gathering, one that Karen would never forget. The next morning, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. Word travels fast in Maplewood Estates, especially when your HOA president calls 911 on the wrong man. By sunrise, everyone had already seen the clips floating around the neighborhood group chat, Karen yelling in her lavender blazer, while the officers saluted me. Someone had even slowed it down and added dramatic music. I couldn't lie, it was cinematic. I was in the middle of trimming a few bushes when I noticed blinds twitching from every direction. A couple of neighbors waved awkwardly, unsure whether to laugh or apologize for the circus that had unfolded. Karen's car, meanwhile, hadn't moved since the previous night. Her curtains were shut tight, but her ego must have been wide open and bleeding. Still, I had no plans to push things. After all, my goal wasn't revenge, it was peace. I'd already reported the break-in quietly to my attorney. If she tried anything else, I'd handle it legally. But Karen Whitmore wasn't the kind of woman to retreat gracefully. At exactly 10:04 a.m., a white envelope appeared in my mailbox, hand-delivered. No postage, no name on the return line. Inside was a printed notice, urgent, HOA communication. Dear Mr. Carter, you are hereby summoned to appear before the Maplewood Estates HOA Committee to address multiple violations, including unauthorized property modifications, disrespectful conduct toward an HOA official, and the use of law enforcement and personnel to intimidate the community. Attendance mandatory within 48 hours. No signature, just the HOA logo at the top, and Karen's typed initials at the bottom like a queen seal. I laughed out loud. Use of law enforcement to intimidate the community. That was a new one. Apparently getting saluted was now an HOA violation. That afternoon, while I was reorganizing my tools in the garage, I heard her voice again, muffled but sharp. Karen was outside speaking to someone on her phone. Her tone was the usual cocktail of anger and self-importance. Yes, he's dangerous. I don't care who he knows. He made me look like a fool, and now he's rallying the neighborhood against me. The HOA has to act fast. I almost wanted to walk over and tell her she was doing a great job rallying the neighborhood herself, just not in the way she thought. Instead, I let her stew. Because the best counter to someone like Karen is patience. They always end up undoing themselves. By the next morning, the HOA summons had somehow leaked to the community's group chat, probably thanks to Linda from Lot 17, who was Maplewood's unofficial gossip journalist. Within hours, the comments exploded. Wait, she's suing him. After breaking into his house, didn't she literally call the cops on him for changing locks? Oh, this is going to be good. It was shaping up to be the HOA meeting of the decade. When the day arrived, I wore my usual flannel shirt and jeans, casual, calm, and completely unbothered. Karen, however, looked ready for a courtroom drama. She stood at the front of the clubhouse, wearing a bright purple blazer, pearls gleaming, and a stack of papers thick enough to stop a bullet. Her expression said everything she wanted her control back. The room was packed. Neighbors, HOA members, even a few curious guests from nearby communities who'd heard about the 911 incident. It felt less like a meeting and more like a live reality show. Mr. Carter, Karen began voice-dripping with false politeness. You stand accused of multiple HOA violations, including unauthorized structural changes, hostile behavior, and public defamation of an HOA officer. I crossed my arms. By changing my locks, she scowled. You know very well what you did. You embarrassed this entire community by involving the police in a private HOA matter, the crowd murmured. I could feel half of them wanting to laugh. One board member, a gray-haired man named Walter, cleared his throat. Mrs. Whitmore, if I recall, the police were called by you. Karen's jaw tightened. I was misled by Mr. Carter's behavior. It was suspicious. Suspicious, I repeated, amused. Standing on my porch in daylight, changing locks, drinking coffee. The laughter that broke out was impossible to contain this time. Even Walter had to hide a grin. Karen slammed her palm on the table. This is not a joke. As president of this HOA, I have the authority to. Actually, I interrupted, reaching into my briefcase. Your authority is something I'd like to discuss. I placed a folder on the table. Inside were printed photos from my security footage, the ones showing her and her so-called maintenance man sneaking into my house. The entire board leaned forward. Mrs. Whitmore, I said evenly, here's you inside my private property without consent. Here's you photographing my documents. And here's you leaving through the back door, all time-stamped and submitted to the county sheriff's office. The silence was electric. Karen's face drained of color. That's not me, she squeaked. Walter leaned closer. Karen, that's your blazer, the lavender one. You wore it to the Easter brunch. The audience started whispering again. A woman in the back muttered, "Oh, she's done." Karen's voice cracked. This is a misunderstanding. The HOA bylaws allow inspections, not without permission or notice, I said, and certainly not when you're rummaging through someone's mail. She opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. Her hand trembled on the stack of papers, as if she was physically trying to hold her crumbling authority together. Walter sighed. Mrs. Whitmore, I think it's clear that the board needs to review your conduct. Perhaps it's time for a leadership change. That sentence hit her like a bullet. You can't remove me. I built this community. Exactly, I said quietly. And now you're tearing it apart. The board murmured in agreement. One by one, members began voting to suspend her duties pending investigation. Each eye made her shoulders sink lower. Finally, Walter turned to me. Mr. Carter, on behalf of the board, we apologize for the distress caused by this incident. We'll ensure your rights as a homeowner are fully respected. Karen's eyes flashed with disbelief. She stood pointing a trembling finger at me. You think this is over? You humiliated me. You'll regret, Mrs. Whitmore. Walter interrupted. You're dismissed. She stormed out, clutching her clipboard like a weapon stripped of its power. Duchess yipped in protest as she passed. When the door slammed behind her, the room erupted into applause. Some people cheered. Others laughed openly for the first time in years. I just smiled, nodding politely, and gathered my papers. Walking back home afterward, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't threatened. I'd simply let the truth do its job. That night, as I sat on my porch, under the warm orange glow of the sunset, my phone buzzed with messages, neighbors thanking me, some inviting me for dinner, others jokingly asking if I wanted to run for HOA president. I declined every offer. The last thing I wanted was to become what I'd just defeated. But Karen wasn't done, not yet. At around 9:30 p.m., I saw movement across the street. Her blinds shifted and her car door slammed. She was on her phone again, pacing like a general plotting a counterattack. I couldn't hear her words, but I recognized the energy humiliation morphing into obsession. People like Karen don't fade quietly, they double down. I leaned back, took a slow sip of coffee, and smiled to myself. If she wanted a war, she was about to find out that discipline beats drama every time. Because the next move wouldn't come from her, it would come from me. And this time I wouldn't need a badge to make my point, just a backyard BBQ, a few well-timed guests, and a little taste of poetic justice. 2 days after the HOA meeting, Maplewood Estates felt lighter. Neighbors waved again. Lawns looked brighter. Kids played outside without Karen's clipboard shadowing them. For the first time since I'd moved in, the air didn't taste like paranoia, but I knew better than to believe the battle was over. Karen Whitmore wasn't the type to surrender. She was the type to reload. That afternoon, a notice appeared on the HOA website. Effective immediately, residents are reminded that all community gatherings require advance approval from the HOA president. Of course, the president line hadn't been updated yet. Even after being suspended, Karen still ran the site like her personal fiefdom. I chuckled. Advance approval, huh? I murmured to myself. Funny. I hadn't planned a gathering yet, but suddenly the idea seemed poetic. The next morning I started making phone calls. Not to lawyers this time, though. A few would have loved the drama, but to some old friends. Hey Dave, still on the force? Yup. Why, I'm hosting a little neighborhood BBQ this weekend. Thought you and the boys might like to swing by. Off duty, of course. By noon, my guest list had grown into something Karen's nightmares were made of: half a dozen police officers, 2 deputy marshals, and an ATF agent who owed me a favor. All friends, all good people, and all very aware of the Karen situation. They laughed when I told them what had happened. You, the same guy who ran anti-fraud ops in D.C. Got Karen'd. Yup, I said. Consider this a morale event. Saturday came bright and clear, the kind of day that begged for burgers, laughter, and petty revenge wrapped in good humor. By 11 a.m., the smell of smoked ribs drifted down Maplewood Drive. Folding tables lined my yard, covered with homemade dishes from neighbors who'd finally found a reason to celebrate. There was a quiet rebellion in the air, a collective exhale after years of one woman's dictatorship. Even old Frank from across the street brought out his cooler, shaking his head. Haven't seen this many happy people around here since her Wi-Fi went down. The first police SUV rolled in around noon. No lights, no sirens, just casual arrivals. Officer Daniels stepped out in his weekend polo sunglasses on, smiling wide. Heard there's free brisket, plenty, I said, handing him a plate. Minutes later, 2 more patrol cars pulled up. They parked neatly along the curb, perfectly legal, of course. When the third arrived, the crowd started laughing. Looks like you called a backup unit for the grill, someone shouted. Nah, I said with a grin, just good company. Then came the cherry on top, my old colleague, Special Agent Russ McLean, pulling up in his black SUV with government plates. The moment those shiny letters U.S. Department of Justice caught the sunlight, half the neighborhood went silent for a second, then burst out cheering. It was harmless, really. No weapons, no intimidation, just a bunch of people enjoying food. But perception was delicious. And that's when I saw her, Karen, standing at her window across the street, peeking through the blinds like a hawk who'd just spotted a mouse carrying a badge. Her expression went from confusion to horror to outrage in 5 seconds flat. She stormed outside, heels clacking against the pavement like warning shots. Mr. Carter, she barked, her voice trembling with righteous fury. What in God's name is this? I gestured around casually. Just a neighborhood get-together. Everyone's welcome, of course. She glared at the officers laughing near the grill. This is a clear violation of community policy. You can't. Community gatherings require HOA approval, I said, quoting her own website. But as of last I checked, you're no longer president. Gasps and chuckles rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered. He said it. Karen's face turned the color of overcooked shrimp. You think this is funny? Parading law enforcement through the neighborhood to intimidate people. Officer Daniels looked over, burger in hand. Ma'am, we're just here for lunch. Officers, she snapped, pointing dramatically. You're being used to harass me. Russ nearly choked on his drink, laughing. Lady, if this is harassment, it's the tastiest I've ever had. The neighbors roared. Even I had to look away to hide my smile. Karen's composure cracked completely. She pointed at me, shaking with frustration. You're mocking me in my own community. You're turning everyone against me. Karen, I said softly, you did that all by yourself. For a moment her mouth opened, then closed. She looked around, realizing that no one was backing her up. The board members she'd once commanded were standing at the buffet table chatting happily with the officers. Even her so-called allies avoided her gaze. And that's when something inside her seemed to collapse. Her eyes welled up. She turned away quickly and stormed back toward her house, Duchess yapping along the whole way. The party went silent for a beat, then someone turned the music back up, and just like that, laughter returned. Around 4 p.m., as the afternoon sun dipped behind the maple trees, Officer Daniels clapped me on the shoulder. You know, Jim, I've seen hundreds of neighborhood disputes. But this one's poetic. Maybe I said, flipping the last burger. But it's not about winning. It's about boundaries. He nodded. She won't mess with you again. Probably not, I said. But even if she tries, I've got enough evidence to make her think twice. As the officers packed up and the neighbors said their goodbyes, I noticed Karen's blinds twitch once more. She was still watching, always watching. But this time there was no power behind it, no clipboard, no threats. Just a bitter reminder of a kingdom lost. That night, as I cleaned up, I found a folded piece of paper slipped under my front doormat. No envelope. Just one handwritten line in shaky script. You humiliated me. I'll never forgive you, I sighed. Not anger, not even surprise, just pity. Some people live off control, the way others need air, take it away, and they suffocate themselves. I tore the note in half, dropped it into the trash, and locked my new deadbolt with a satisfying click. The next morning, I woke up to another surprise. My phone buzzed with messages, screenshots, comments, and even a short video someone had posted to social media titled, HOA president loses it after ex-federal agent throws barbecue with cops. Over 5,000 views in less than 12 hours. Karen had gone viral. The footage showed her screaming about policy violations while the officers tried not to laugh. The comment section was merciless. She's the reason aliens won't visit Earth. I'd pay HOA fees just to watch this drama. Imagine calling 911 and they salute the guy instead. By noon, someone had already made memes. One showed her pointing at me while the caption read, "When you call the cops on your HOA dues collector." Another had me holding a spatula with the words, Federal BBQ Enforcement Division. I should have felt bad. But honestly, it felt like justice, not cruel, not malicious, just balanced. For years, Karen had ruled this neighborhood through fear and paperwork. Now she was learning that sometimes the best karma doesn't come through punishment, it comes through exposure. And the more people saw her tantrum, the less power she had left. By evening, her car was gone. Word spread that she'd driven to her sister's place to clear her head. No one missed her. Maplewood Estates was quiet again. Peaceful. Almost too peaceful. As I stood on my porch, the smell of barbecue still lingering in the air, I couldn't help but think. In the end, I never had to fight her. She fought herself. And all I had to do was keep the grill hot. Karen disappeared for almost a week after the infamous BBQ. No sightings, no rants on the HOA app, not even the sound of her dog yapping at passing cars. For a moment, I thought maybe she'd finally taken the hint. Maybe, just maybe, peace had returned to Maplewood Estates. But then on the 8th morning, I woke up to something that told me the Karen era wasn't over. Not by a long shot. A bright yellow envelope was taped to my door, sealed with the HOA's crest, like it was a royal decree. Inside was a printed letter written in Karen's favorite font, Times New Roman, bold size 14, the kind that screams authority. Notice of HOA investigation. The Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association has reason to believe that resident James Carter is in violation of multiple community standards, including but not limited to unauthorized gatherings without HOA approval, intimidation of residents and officials, violation of decorum and community trust. A formal hearing will be held on Thursday to discuss potential disciplinary action, including possible revocation of residency privileges. Revocation of residency privileges. She was actually trying to evict me from my own home. I laughed so hard I almost spilled my coffee. Then I caught sight of a familiar lavender blazer lurking behind a row of hedges. There she was, phone in hand, filming me reading the letter like she was collecting evidence. "Morning, Karen," I called cheerfully. "Still committing to the villain arc, I see." Her mouth tightened. "You'll regret mocking me, Mr. Carter. The HOA has rules for a reason." "Sure," I said. "And breaking into my house wasn't one of them." Her eyes flickered with panic, but she recovered fast. "That footage was illegally obtained," she snapped. "I've spoken with legal counsel." I raised an eyebrow. "Was your legal counsel the same guy who thought it was okay to trespass with you?" Her jaw clenched. "You think you can humiliate me in front of this whole neighborhood and just get away with it, Karen," I said, lowering my voice. "The only person humiliating you is you." She turned red, spun on her heel, and stomped off. Duchess barked in protest as if demanding a rematch. I decided to play her game, but smarter. That afternoon, I printed every HOA letter she'd sent me since I moved in, all 23 of them. Then I added the security footage of her break-in copies of the 911 call report and the apology note from the police department for the misunderstanding. I placed them neatly into a single binder labeled Karen Files. When Thursday came, I walked into the clubhouse early. The room was already filled, board members at the front, neighbors sitting in the back like a live audience. Karen sat at the head of the table, chin high, expression smug. "Mr. Carter," she said sweetly, "you're just in time." "Shall we begin?" "By all means," I replied, setting the thick binder on the table with a satisfying thud. She flinched. The meeting began with her listing violations. Every word oozed self-righteousness. Hosting unauthorized gatherings, she began flipping through papers. Specifically, an event involving uniformed law enforcement officers, which made several residents uncomfortable. "Uncomfortable?" I repeated. "Or embarrassed, intimidated," she snapped. "You used your influence to mock this community's leadership." Walter, the gray-haired board member, interjected gently. "Mrs. Whitmore, I thought your position was suspended pending review." She ignored him. "I am still the elected president until the vote of removal is certified." "That's not how bylaws work," Walter sighed. But Karen wasn't listening. Her hands were trembling, voice rising with every sentence. "This man is a danger to the harmony of Maplewood Estates. He's manipulative, arrogant, and disrespectful of authority." "Authority?" I asked. "You mean your authority?" She slammed her palm on the table. "Yes." The word echoed through the hall. Everyone went dead silent. That's when I opened my binder. Glad we cleared that up. "Now let's talk about your authority and where it ends." I pulled out the first page, a still frame from my security footage. Karen's face mid-step inside my house. Gasps spread through the room. I flipped to the next page, screenshots of her messages to the maintenance worker she dragged along. "Karen, did you or did you not enter my property without consent?" I asked calmly. She stammered. I was conducting a inspection," I finished for her. "Without notice, without approval, and without my presence. I'm the HOA president. I have the right. You had the right. I interrupted until you turned that title into a weapon." I handed copies of the 911 call report to each board member. "You not only broke in, you called the police on me for replacing the locks you compromised. You endangered me, my contractor, and wasted emergency resources." Her voice shook. "This is all lies, fabrications," Walter frowned. "Karen, the footage is time-stamped. The report is official. You need to stop talking." But she didn't. She couldn't. Karen Whitmore had spent too many years being the loudest voice in every room. She wasn't about to let logic silence her. "You all think he's some kind of hero because he waved a badge around," she shouted. "He's manipulating you. He's dangerous. He's Karen." The voice came from the doorway. Every head turned. Standing, there were 2 uniformed deputies, the same ones from the 911 incident. One of them held a manila folder. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, stepping forward, "we're here on behalf of the county sheriff's office. We received a formal complaint and evidence of unlawful entry and harassment." Her face turned ghostly white. No, this isn't happening." The deputy placed the folder on the table. "You're not under arrest, ma'am, but you are being served a cease and desist order. You are to refrain from contacting or approaching Mr. Carter or attempting to exercise any HOA authority until the investigation concludes." The entire room erupted in whispers. Phones came out. Someone recorded. Karen's hand trembled as she reached for the paper. "You can't do this," she hissed. "This is my neighborhood." I leaned back in my chair. "Not anymore." Her eyes flicked to me, pure venom. "You ruined everything." "No," I said softly. "You did that the moment you decided someone else's home was your property." For a long moment she just stood there clutching the paper. Then she turned sharply, stormed out of the room, and slammed the door so hard a painting fell off the wall. The board meeting dissolved after that. People were too stunned to continue. Walter approached me quietly. "You handled that well, James." "I've dealt with worse," I said, smiling faintly, "but I appreciate it." As I walked out, the neighborhood felt different again, calmer, freer. It was as if the entire community had been holding its breath for years and finally exhaled. Over the next few days, word spread like wildfire. The HOA quietly removed Karen from all official listings. A new interim president was appointed, a kind woman named Alice, who seemed more interested in planting flowers than policing mailbox paint. For the first time since I moved in, I slept with the windows open. No paranoia. No barking. No lavender blazers. One evening I noticed Karen's house dark, curtains gone, driveway empty. A for sale sign sat on the lawn, tilting slightly in the breeze. I stood there for a while staring at it, not out of triumph, but something else, maybe pity. She'd built her entire identity around control, and when it slipped away, she had nothing left to hold on to. The next morning, moving trucks arrived. By noon, she was gone. Just like that, Maplewood Estates had one less tyrant and one more barbecue pit. As I locked my front door that night, I couldn't help smiling. The new deadbolt clicked smoothly into place, the sound of security, peace, and justice all rolled into one. Finally, I whispered to myself, home. When you've spent 20 years in federal service, you learn one simple truth. Power doesn't reveal a person's character, it amplifies it. Karen Whitmore had been stripped of her crown, but losing power didn't make her humble. It made her desperate. A month passed after her official removal from the HOA board. The neighborhood calmed down, and I started believing that maybe, just maybe, the saga was over. But one crisp Saturday morning, while I was fixing the hinges on my gate, a black sedan rolled slowly down the street and stopped in front of my house. Out stepped Karen. No pearls this time, no clipboard, just plain clothes, sunglasses, and an expression carved from pride and bitterness. She looked thinner, tired, yet the fire in her eyes hadn't died. "Mr. Carter," she began sharply, "we need to talk." I didn't even bother turning off the drill. "Pretty sure there's a court order saying you're not supposed to be here." She crossed her arms. "That order expired last week. And I have something to say before I move." "Move?" I asked. She hesitated, as if admitting defeat was physically painful. "The house sold. Closing's next week." "Well," I said, putting the drill down, "congratulations. That's the best decision you've made since you learned how to spell violation." She ignored the jab. "You think you won, don't you, Karen?" I said calmly. "I wasn't playing to win. I was just playing to be left alone." Her lips trembled, but she pushed on. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. My reputation, my life is ruined. You've turned my neighbors against me." I sighed. "You turned them against yourself. You called the police on your own homeowner. You broke into someone's house. You brought this on." She took a step closer, voice shaking. "You think you're so clever, so righteous. But this neighborhood used to be safe, organized. I built it, and you made it a circus." I looked her square in the eyes. "No, Karen. You made it a dictatorship. I just turned the lights on." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she did something that actually caught me off guard. Her voice softened. "I didn't mean for it to get that bad," she said. "It was supposed to be order, not control. When you've been ignored long enough, sometimes the only way to feel powerful is to tighten your grip." That was the closest thing to self-awareness I'd ever heard from her. For a fleeting second, I saw not the tyrant, but the lonely woman underneath, the one who thought authority could fill the gaps in her life. But that second didn't last. Her face hardened again. "Still," she said coldly, "you shouldn't have embarrassed me. You'll regret that." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that a threat or just nostalgia for the good old days?" She glared, turned on her heel, and marched back to her car. The black sedan pulled away, leaving a trail of exhaust and finality. I figured that was it, the epilogue to a long, ridiculous war. But I should have known better. Karen wasn't the type to bow out quietly. She was the kind to light one last match before walking away. The following week, the HOA held a special community meeting. The new president, Alice, had called it to review the bylaws, aiming to undo years of arbitrary restrictions Karen had imposed. The room was full, standing room only. You could feel the excitement. People brought snacks, notepads, even wine. It wasn't a meeting, it was a liberation ceremony. Alice smiled warmly at the crowd. Thank you all for coming. Tonight we'll vote on several reforms too. The door burst open. Every head turned. And there she was, Karen Whitmore walking in like she still owned the place. Murmurs rippled through the room. Someone whispered, I thought she moved. Karen held a folder high like a trophy. You can't vote without me. This meeting violates Article 12 of the HOA Charter. Former officers retain advisory privileges until board transition is complete. Alice blinked, caught off guard. Karen, that article was repealed last year by you. Karen's face twisted. No. I never approved that repeal. I watched from the back, arms crossed. This was déjà vu with a twist. She stormed to the front, slamming her folder on the table. You're all being manipulated by him, she shouted, jabbing her finger toward me. James Carter, the man who used law enforcement to humiliate me, the man who fixed his locks, I said dryly. Laughter broke out across the room. Even Alice struggled to contain a smile. Karen's voice cracked. He doesn't belong here. He's dangerous. He's retired law enforcement, I said. Not dangerous, just allergic to nonsense. The crowd chuckled again. Karen's hands shook, her voice trembling between rage and desperation. You all think this is funny. You think he's some hero. She turned to Alice. You'll see, he's manipulating everyone, just like he manipulated those police officers. I took a deep breath, stood up, and walked slowly to the front of the room. The laughter died down. Karen, I said gently, you don't have to do this. You're selling your house. You've got a chance to move on. Her eyes narrowed. You think I can just walk away from everything I built? Yes, I said. Because what you built wasn't a community, it was a cage. Gasps. Silence. Karen's expression faltered, but she forced a bitter smile. Maybe you're right, Mr. Carter, but let's see if you can handle what comes next. She opened her folder and began distributing papers, copies of a lawsuit. Whitmore versus Carter. Defamation, emotional distress, and community damages. The room erupted. People shouted, groaned, cursed under their breath. Someone yelled, "Are you kidding me?" I looked at the papers calmly. "You're suing me for public humiliation," she snapped. "For destroying my credibility, I couldn't help it," I laughed. "Karen, your credibility destroyed itself when you called 911 on a homeowner changing his own locks." Alice stood up, her tone firm but kind. "Karen, this isn't the place for that. You're no longer a resident here. You have no authority." Karen's voice wavered. "You can't erase me." I took a step closer. "No one's erasing you, Karen. But maybe it's time you stop trying to write yourself into other people's stories." The room was utterly still. Karen looked around at the faces that used to follow her orders. No one met her eyes. Not one person came to her defense. Her lips trembled. She picked up her folder, clutching it to her chest like a shield. "You'll regret this," she whispered. Then she turned and walked out for the last time. The door clicked shut behind her, and with it, years of fear, resentment, and unnecessary rules finally left Maplewood Estates. After the meeting, neighbors approached me one by one, some shaking my hand, others patting my shoulder. "You handled that perfectly," one said. "About time someone stood up to her," another added. Alice smiled. "We owe you one, James." "No," I said, glancing toward the door where Karen had exited. "You don't owe me anything. We just owed ourselves some peace." As I stepped outside, the night was calm. The air smelled of cut grass and rain, not tension and control. The community lights glowed warm against the quiet streets. I paused for a moment, looking up at the sky. Somewhere a train horn echoed in the distance, freedom on the move. For the first time in months, I felt truly settled. The kind of peace you can't buy, only earn one lock, one confrontation, one boundary at a time. And though part of me wondered what would become of Karen Whitmore, another part knew the answer didn't matter. Because for once, Maplewood Estates didn't belong to her. It belonged to everyone else. And me, I finally belonged there too. A month later, Maplewood Estates looked like an entirely different place. The lawns weren't just neat anymore, they were alive. Kids rode their bikes down the street without worrying about being too noisy. A few residents even started planting wildflowers instead of sticking to the sterile HOA-approved azaleas. There was laughter again, porch lights left on, late neighbors waving at one another instead of glaring from behind blinds. For the first time, it actually felt like a neighborhood, not a kingdom. And me, I finally had what I came here for: peace. I remember standing on my porch that evening, watching the sunset melt gold across the rooftops. The air smelled of barbecue and cut grass, and for once the only sound I heard was the quiet hum of life. No HOA notices, no shouting, no lavender blazers. Just silence and contentment. I'd just finished repairing the fence when my neighbor Frank walked over with 2 beers in hand. He was a retired electrician, cranky on the outside, warm as a campfire on the inside. "Looks good," he said, nodding toward the fence. "Bet you never thought you'd be doing home improvement without getting fined for it." I laughed, taking the bottle he offered. "Feels weird. Almost illegal not having a citation on my doormat." Frank chuckled. "You know, it's funny. The whole time Karen ran this place, everyone complained behind her back. But no one actually stood up to her. Then you moved in." "I didn't plan to be the hero," I said. "Just didn't like bullies." He took a sip. "Guess that's the difference. You've got the kind of calm that scares loud people." That made me smile. "Maybe that's the trick. You don't have to shout to make yourself heard." We sat there in comfortable silence for a while, watching fireflies spark over the lawns. For once, Maplewood wasn't suffocating under rules, it was breathing again. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten, no return address. The handwriting was unmistakable, the sharp, slanted script of someone who pressed too hard with the pen. "Mr. Carter, I sold the house. I'm moving to stay with my sister in Georgia. I know you think I'm the villain here, but I never meant for things to go that far. I just wanted people to follow the rules, to care about the community." Somewhere along the way, I forgot the difference between caring and controlling. "Don't bother responding. I doubt I'll ever come back." Karen, I read it twice. There was no apology exactly, but between the lines there was something close enough. Regret, awareness, maybe even shame. For the first time, I didn't feel angry at her. I felt sorry. Karen had been a force of nature, exhausting, invasive, destructive, but she was also a product of her own loneliness. Somewhere under all that noise, she just wanted to feel important. Needed, seen. Unfortunately, she'd mistaken control for connection. I folded the letter, slipped it into a drawer, and went about my day. Weeks passed, and life finally settled into something that resembled normalcy. Alice officially became the new HOA president, though honestly president wasn't the right word anymore. Under her, the HOA turned into more of a volunteer committee, light-hearted, cooperative, full of laughter instead of rules. She invited me to a community picnic to celebrate the new chapter. I showed up mostly out of curiosity. The atmosphere was completely different from the HOA meetings I remembered. Kids ran around with balloons, neighbors shared homemade casseroles, and Frank was manning the grill wearing an apron that said Certified HOA Menace. Alice spotted me and waved. "James, glad you made it." "Wouldn't miss it," I said. "Looks like Maplewood finally found its rhythm." She smiled. "We owe you a lot, you know. You reminded everyone that rules aren't meant to control people, they're meant to protect them." I shook my head. "You don't owe me. You all just needed someone to remind you that fear isn't leadership." We stood there for a moment, watching the sunset settle over the park. Alice said softly, "Do you think she'll ever come back?" I shrugged. "Maybe. People like Karen don't disappear, they just move to another HOA." We both laughed. That night, as I walked home, I caught my reflection in the window, calm, older, but lighter somehow. The house that once felt like a battleground now felt like a home. I glanced up at the new security camera I'd installed after the break-in. Still working perfectly. The locks, the same ones that started this entire mess, gleamed under the porch light. It was funny, really. A story that began with locks had ended with something being unlocked, not just the doors of a house, but the freedom to live without someone else's permission. As I turned the key and stepped inside, the quiet hum of safety wrapped around me like an old friend. I made myself a cup of coffee, sat by the window, and watched the lights flicker across the neighborhood. For the first time since moving in, I didn't feel like an outsider. I felt like part of something real. A week later, I got a message from one of my old colleagues back in DC. It was just one line, no context. "You always did have a talent for cleaning up bad organizations." I laughed out loud. Maybe I did. But honestly, I wasn't sure what I'd done here except stand my ground. Sometimes that's enough, because life isn't about winning every argument. It's about knowing which ones are worth fighting for, and which ones are just noise. Karen's downfall wasn't revenge. It was natural cause and effect. When you build a life on fear, control, and ego, eventually it collapses under its own weight. But when you live with patience, boundaries, and quiet conviction, even the loudest people can't shake you. That's the real victory. Sometimes the loudest people in our lives aren't powerful, they're just scared. They try to control everything because they don't know how to trust anyone. But real strength isn't about control. It's about knowing when to stand firm and when to let go. When I changed those locks, it wasn't just about keeping someone out. It was about protecting peace, the kind that only comes when you stop letting fear, noise, and ego dictate how you live. To anyone watching this, if someone tries to control your life, your home, or your happiness, stay calm, stay smart, and set your boundaries. You don't need to shout to prove your worth. Let your actions, your integrity, and your silence speak for you. And sometimes the best revenge isn't payback, it's peace. Now tell me in the comments, have you ever dealt with a Karen or HOA nightmare? What did you do to keep your sanity? And if you enjoyed this story, hit that subscribe button and join us for the next one, because around here, justice always finds its way home.